Setting up your computer to program an FTC robot can feel really intimidating to new programmers, especially at the start of a new season. There's a whole lot of information thrown at you right away, and it's often the one thing that stops a team cold before they've even written a single line of code and pushes you into block coding instead. By the end of this video, you're going to have a complete professional development environment ready to go, and trust me, the setup is really simple. We're going to use industry standard tools like Android Studio and Github Desktop, the same programs that full-time software developers use. While it can seem daunting, this one-time setup will make programming your robot for the rest of the season incredibly simple and give you a massive head start on learning real-world skills. My name is Coach Pratt, and for over 10 years, I've been a robotics, design, and technology educator. I've coached FTC teams to national championships and Inspire Awards. I've seen where teams get stuck or feel intimidated, and I've built this guide to get you through it. I'm going to run you through the entire process step by step. We'll start by installing Android Studio and updating your Java version. Then I'll show you a few tweaks inside the IDE program that is going to make your development much smoother. And from there, we'll set up Github Desktop to grab the official FTC code. And finally, we'll set up your project so you can open it up and start programming immediately. So let's get started on this. First thing I want to say right off the bat is if you prefer to follow through this on a text-based tutorial, if you go on the First Tech Challenge official documentation, you can find a full written tutorial here. However, I find that some of this documentation is out of date as of the present time of recording, and it can also be helpful to kind of have someone to walk through you as a video for this. So I'm providing this video resource if you would prefer to work through that. There are several ways to program a robot. In First Tech Challenge, you can use blocks, you can use on-bot Java, or you can use Android Studio. And I'm a big fan of Android Studio because it has a lot of, well, one, it's a professional documentation place that you can work in. It's a professional IDE that you can work in. So it gets you more used to industry standard tools. Two, it's got a lot of niceties and a lot of extra little features in it that just makes your programming life so much easier. It's a lot easier to collaborate on. And then three, it's a lot easier to work on with GitHub, which is also another industry standard tool. And the more industry standard tools that you can be using in your time in FTC, the better you'll be doing when you get off into university or you get off into further in your boss career, whatever have you. So first thing you want to do is you need to install Android Studio. So you can open up a new tab, and if you just search for Android Studio, you should be able to come up as one of the first thing pops up as download. I'll have all these links in the description down below. And we're just going to download the latest version of the Android Studio. The documentation talks about Ladybug. Android Studio releases new versions quite frequently. No need to concern about this. Just make sure you're on the most recent Android Studio. If you're on a few versions back, it also doesn't really matter. So you can go ahead and accept the terms and agreements. And then because I'm installing this on a Mac, I have an Apple chip on mine. Make sure you choose the correct one for your case. And of course, we all know that everybody 100% fully reads through all this documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and let this download, and we'll be right back once it's fully downloaded. All right, so we've got that downloaded. So on a Mac, you can go ahead and unzip this. You can simply double click it. And you can just go ahead and drag and drop this into your applications folder to be able to actually install this. In my case, I'm going to replace mine because I have an older version of Android Studio running. And then that's it. The install is quite easy. Now, once you have that installed, we're going to go ahead and open this up. And we have a few changes and setups to make so that it works well for programming FTC. Now, on FTC, we're using JDK or Java Development Kit 17. And if you use the latest Java JDK, you will not be able to program using the FTC SDK. So you have to make sure you're using the correct Java version. So let's go ahead and do that. This pop-up's allowing you're welcome to improve things on Android Studio. I like to not send my information to Android Studio. Okay. So with our Android Studio set up, we need to go ahead and do some of that, update that Java SDK, JDK. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go to the Java archive downloads. I'm going to make sure that I download Java 17. You're going to have to make sure that you grab the correct development kit for the version of software that you're running on your computer. So I am using a macOS ARM processor. ARM is for if you're using the Apple A1, M2, M3, M4 chip, whatever that would be. There's also Mac OS if you are using Intel based, that would be some of the older Macs. And of course, Windows and Linux if you're going to be programming any of those. So for me, I'm going to be grabbing the Mac OS ARM DMJ installer just because it's a little faster, but you're also welcome to use the compressed archive. So I'm going to grab the DMJ just because it's a click, drag and drop, and it is installed, ready to rock. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this. Once it is downloaded, we're going to go ahead and change our JDK over. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this file. Just go ahead and double click the package, and this will go ahead and install it. We'll kind of run through, we'll install it for everyone. We'll go ahead and install. Put in any passwords you might need to be able to install this on your admin account. And we are done. You can go ahead and move that to the bin. Now we're actually going to change our settings in the Android Studio. So I'm going to go over to Android Studio. And I'm going to come up to I'm going to click on Android Studio, and then I'm going to choose Settings. From this setting menu here is where I can actually go ahead and change what build version I'm using. I'm going to come to Build Execution Deployment, Build Tools, and then I'm going to select Gradle. Underneath Gradle, I need to make sure that I'm using the Java JDK 17 version here. In order to do that, we can just go ahead and click this little folder, select our JDK, automatically open up to all the different versions of Java that I have on my computer. You can see that I actually have Java 17 through 23 up here, and we need to make sure that we are selecting the JDK 17. So I'm going to select 17, select Open, and now we can go ahead and select OK. Now, another note here is at some point it might ask you to upgrade your Gradle for your FTC project. You should not upgrade Gradle. If you upgrade Gradle, you're going to have to go back in and change that JDK back to 17 again. And honestly, that's it for setup on Android Studio. One last thing I like to do for Android Studio is I come back to Settings and I come down to Plugins. And inside Plugins, I like to search for Rainbow Brackets, and I like to install this Rainbow Brackets because what it does is it allows you to set up different parentheses and squirrely brackets in a rainbow version. In default theme, it will make them all white, and it can be a little bit confusing to keep track of where your curly brackets open and close. So having a color coding really helps kind of set that up. So I like to use the rainbow brackets, or even rainbow brackets light as well is also acceptable. There's no need to pay for any of that. I find that at least for what we're using in the FTC development world, there's more than enough features in the free version to be able to get us what you need. So with that, Android Studio is mostly set up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the SDK for your robot controller. Now, the cool thing about this is that a lot of this robot controller already has examples for you that you can run through and actually run through. So for example, if I wanted to use the concept rev LED, they already have code for me in how I need to actually use the rev LED or LED green and red LED. If I wanted to do telemetry, it already has a concept for how I could use telemetry inside of this. If I need to do a robot hardware, how to set that up. It's fully commented, and it really helps you out with figuring out how do you do things inside of the FTC setup. It also has all of your libraries that you're going to need and things like that. So for instance, and don't worry about this if it feels a little bit overwhelming, there's all these import statements. These are basically helper tools, which means you don't need to program a servo for how to actually make a servo run. You just have to tell it where to go to its angle using these libraries. And having the FTC SDK sets it up for you. If that seems a little bit confusing right now, don't worry about that. We'll explain all of this goes as we get into future videos. But for now, just know that you're really going to want to use the Robot Controller SDK so that you can get set up and really easy to get started. To be able to do that, we're going to use GitHub. And GitHub is another industry standard tool. It is possible to set this up without having to use GitHub. However, I really like using Github Desktop because it makes it really easy to have version control. If you don't know what GitHub is, it's a way of keeping track of your code over time and seeing how you're making edits and changes to your code. For example, if we look at the code for the FTC robot controller, where that preview code was, we can see that they have 48 different commits. And we actually go back in history and we can see all the different things that they've changed to the FTC robot controller over time. In fact, we could even go back to the FTC robot controller 6.2 or even the 1.0 and see what kind of changes they're making. And it can tell us what things they've updated. So for example, in 10.3, it'll tell us exactly, typically in notes, what it is they did to update that. And we can have this in our own functions, which is really, really helpful. So let's say we are writing a code and we overwrite one of our op modes for autonomous, but our previous autonomous was actually better and we forgot where that code was. Having GitHub will allow us to keep track of that. So first thing you want to do is you're going to go to github.com and sign up, and you're going to want to create a GitHub account. Now keep in mind that in GitHub, these are public-facing usernames. Your email can be hidden, but your username is going to be public. So you probably don't want it to be something like XX Roxy Cool Dude 95. You probably want it to be something a little more professional. You also probably don't want it to be your first name if you are still a student. So for instance, putting in Brogan Pratt if you're still a student might not be the best way. Having some sort of obfuscation might be a good way of sorting that out. So you should go ahead and make a GitHub account. I would pause the video now and make one of those. If you need help on that, I've got a video down below. As well, I have a video on how do you download Github Desktop and get that all set up down below. But for the most part, if you do a quick search for Github Desktop, go ahead and download it and install it. It'll open up to a page like so. So let's go ahead and open up Github Desktop here. We actually have our own code set up here. This is assuming you've already signed in and so forth. Again, I've got a video down below on how you can set a GitHub Desktop up quite easily. So on my GitHub Desktop, I can come up and choose File, and I can select a Clone Repository. Now it's going to ask you to choose something from github.com, GitHub Enterprise, or URL. We're going to select URL, and the URL that we're going to put in is simply this First Tech Challenge FTC Robot Controller. I can just grab that URL, just copy it, go back to GitHub Desktop. I can just paste that username right in there. And then you need to choose a local path. I already have an FTC robot controller set up, so I'm actually going to choose a new one here. And I'm going to go back to my documents. I'll come inside my GitHub folder. I'm going to make a new folder here. I'm going to call this one FTC Robot Controller Tutorial because I already have one set up. I'm going to clone this one as Robot Controller 2. Let's go ahead and select this. And so I'm making a clone over. I can go ahead and select clone, and it's going to download all of those, all of that code and those libraries and anything that I'm going to need to help set up programming an FTC robot right to my local computer. So not only is it on this GitHub Desktop, if I come over here and I go to my Finder window, and if I come up to my GitHub and I go to that FTC Robot Controller Tutorial and my Robot Controller 2, you can actually see that I have all these different Gradles, I have all these different libraries, and then I have all this specific team code as well as source files. And these were all just downloaded directly onto my computer. And I've got these all set up, ready to rock, which is super, super nice. Again, this looks like a lot of stuff, but you don't really have to worry about any of this stuff. I'm just letting you know that you now have all of these files on your computer ready to use. Now, before we get further into GitHub, one thing to note is when you clone a repository, that doesn't mean you have write access to this person's repository. You're technically making a fork of this repository where you have a main development branch that someone else has set up. Now I'm going to go back to the official first docs here. The one thing to note is that when you're making a fork of a repository, it's different from actually taking the repository. That doesn't mean that you can make changes to the actual First Tech Challenge SDK. That's not going to happen. You won't be able to make changes here. The only people that have access to this are the actual authors, as well as anyone that actually is a managing contributor, which in this case is Cal Kestis and Craig McFarlane. No one else can make changes to this GitHub repo. Instead, what you have done is you have made a fork, which is kind of like making a branching path or a fork in the road, where it's the same road, but you're kind of going off from the main kind of direction. You're all on the A44 and you're pulling off onto, a sub highway is effectively what you've done. So you can have the main repository here, which is the FTC robot controller, whereas you have made a separate clone of that, and then you have a version of that on your local computer that you can make changes to. Now, the cool thing about using GitHub Desktop is that anytime that SDK gets updated, and typically it's updated at least once or twice a season, you can just, on GitHub Desktop, there's this little button here called Fetch Origin, and it automatically fetches any other contributors to your repo, as well as that upstream repo, which is super, super handy. And we'll talk more about that later, but just know that if you need to make updates to that SDK, using GitHub Desktop is really, really useful, and it will significantly decrease your development time. So let's go ahead and actually get this Android Studio set up for the last thing that we need to do. So last thing on Android Studio, I'm going to go ahead and select File. I'm going to choose Open. And now we can go to GitHub. We can find our FTC Robot Controller tutorial, and then our Robot Controller 2, select Open. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up in a new window because I have one open. And we'll go ahead and trust all the projects inside of this. We can just trust this whole folder. And now I have it automatically opens it up in a README. It tells me where I can set things up. And it has, I don't want to actually pull things in. It has all that code that we need set up in it. So let's take a quick overview of this. In this FTC Robot Controller section, here's where we can find the actual examples. So if I come inside Java, inside the org first inspires FTC Robot Controller, external samples, here's where I can look at a whole bunch of samples that they've already made for me if I need to use a touch sensor. I can see how that's already set up. It's been fully commented, and that it kind of helps coach me through how to use these things. And I highly recommend that you spend some time looking through these external samples. When it comes time to write your own code, you want to put this inside the team code and the Java folder here, and then inside this org first expires. So you do not want to write your own code inside the FTC Robot Controller folder. You want to write your own code inside the team code folder. And that's really important. I'm going to say it again. Write your code in the team code folder, not inside the FTC Robot Controller. Now, at this point, your Android Studio is set up and ready to run for using the Rev Control Hub and setting it up for FTC. You've got your rainbow brackets set up. You have the correct project set up here, and you have GitHub Desktop set up on your computer. Now, this tutorial is not going to actually show you how to actually do any programming. It is simply a setup time. If you want to get further into how we're actually going to start programming your robot controller, I suggest you take a look at some videos in the playlist down below on how to program these things. Inside, I have a test bench that you can use to actually set yourself up with programming. And then I also teach you how to actually set these things up. And we'll go further into how do you use all these specific sensors, motors, and do different things like that using Java for FTC. So I hope you found this helpful in getting your Android Studio set up. And best of luck on your next Robotics project.